Good day. What is an Alpha Prime game?
An Alpha Prime game is the most special type of game of all. An Alpha Prime game is not merely a good game or a legendary one. It is a game that features a certain series of elements that brings the player back year after year and playthrough after playthrough. The player will know every square inch of every level, and the player will know all the lines of dialogue word for word. The player will be able to hum all the songs pitch perfect. An Alpha Prime game is something that goes beyond mere nostalgia, for the Alpha Prime game can have its flaws and its successors, but despite all that, the player will come back time and time again, and each time they come back, it will be like the very first time they ever played it. An Alpha Prime game is so good that the player makes it a part of their very life.
The Alpha Prime game we're taking a look at today is, first, Encounter Assault Recon.
F.E.A.R. was developed by Monolith Productions of Blood and AVP2 fame, and published by Vivendi Universal Games, and then later republished by WB Games after they bought the franchise. In fact, these days, when you boot up the Steam version of the game, you now see a WB logo flash up in addition to all the others. It was fittingly released in October of 2005 for the PC, and that is the version we're going to be looking at today. Although, the first time when I played the game, it was on the Xbox 360, and that version of the game was developed by Day One Studios, and they would later go on to develop F.E.A.R 3 in its totality. The Xbox 360 version is a competent port, although I do remember some frame rate issues here and there, and the console exclusive weapon is a bit underwhelming. One notable element of the Xbox 360 version is the fact that it had an instant action mode that basically just dumped you on one of the more exciting levels. The game was good enough that I would end up recommending it to my grandfather, and he would pick up his own copy for the PC, and that would actually reignite my interest in the game after I'd beaten it and kind of forgotten about it. And then finally, in 2012, I picked up the F.E.A.R pack for Steam, and I never looked back. And thus, here we are today. The Steam version of F.E.A.R is quite stable, and I never had any crashes to desktop, nor did I have any game-breaking bugs that couldn't be fixed. Oh, you know you are old when a game from 2005 is so retro that you need a file to fix the game on a modern machine. If you want to play this on Win 10, you need to download a file from the PC Gaming Wiki that will fix the horrible slowdown that will occur due to F.E.A.R searching for HID compliant devices for some reason. This patch will also work with the F.E.A.R expansion packs as well. You can get this game to run in 2 to 4K, but that requires another patch to enable and can potentially make the HUD really small. Today, I'm only running the game in 1080p. All told, the PC version of the game is quick and easy to get running on a modern system and is by far the best way to enter the world of F.E.A.R. The core concepts for F.E.A.R were there from the very beginning. The very first trailer dropped in 2004, and at the time of that trailer's release, Monolith's director of technology stated that the game's core concept was to make the player feel like a character in an action movie. This inspired a great many elements of the game. Originally, the game was supposed to have had 2 villains in addition to the series' arch-villain, Alma. Paxton Fettel was still part of the game, but he might have potentially been a sidekick to another guy named Conrad Krieg. Thankfully, Monolith cleaned up the game by combining Paxton Fettel and Conrad into just one character. Really, too many villains can definitely make a game very complicated. Horror stylings appear to have been a concurrent concept with the action movie stylings. It is my determination that the developers wanted an action movie style of gameplay with a horror movie atmosphere in order to ensure that their game stood out. One thing that would have made their game stand out in a bad way was a car chase level. Oh yes, there was supposed to be a car chase level in the late game, and you can kind of see where that might have fit in, but thankfully it was cut out. This is one of those things where that would have been a bridge too far. When you have a really tightly designed first-person shooter, adding in vehicular combat can make the game feel very unfocused, and could potentially be the worst area in the game. Crysis had an issue with this. There's a flying level at the very end of Crysis, and it's so poorly poorly designed that it kind of ruins the last part of the game. Thankfully, F.E.A.R did not fall in the pitfall of trying to do too much in a game that was already well designed. F.E.A.R uses the latest version of the Lithtech engine named Jupiter EX. The X makes it sound cool and also references the fact that it uses the DirectX 9 renderer. And as you will have seen in the gameplay by now, the game also utilized the sweet Havoc physics engine. Oh, I never get tired of launching bodies into the stratosphere. One of the most important aspects of F.E.A.R, and likely the single most important element that turned this from a merely good game to an Alpha Prime game, is the Ysmir level gameplay.
F.E.A.R is a first-person shooter where you have 3 weapon slots, non-regenerative health, and the enemy is smart, canny, and very difficult.
That description is about as adequate as saying that the Beretta 92 is a durable pistol with great accuracy and magazine capacity. Sure, it's true, but goes nowhere near explaining its epicness. Even calling the gameplay for F.E.A.R transcendent is an understatement. Evolving the first-person shooter concept is no easy task. Evolve too much and the player will be annoyed by all the crap that gets in the way of the fighting. Evolve too little and the player will be annoyed by how generic the gameplay is. F.E.A.R hits the sweet spot of giving us a gameplay experience we can jump into quickly, but has enough diversity of gameplay so as not to get boring or repetitive. F.E.A.R back in 2005 did something different, and they did it by innovating where it mattered. The enemy AI.
Now, in your basic first-person shooter, your basic grunt will do one of 2 things. He will stand and shoot at you, or B, he will run and shoot at you, whereupon you blast the bastard.
Enter GOAP, or Goal-Oriented Action Planning. This is a type of AI programming that allows the enemy to do more than run forward like it was day 1 at the Battle of the Frontiers. Instead, the AI can actually plan a way to take down the player. This means that the AI will be taking cover, blind firing, retreating, flanking, throwing grenades to make you displaced from cover, and reacting to your flashlight. GOAP is the single most important aspect of F.E.A.R, as this one element makes the gameplay for F.E.A.R pretty much unique. In the Halo series, the gameplay is quite good due to the enemy AI generally being a bit brighter than the AI in the average FPS. It's generally the elites and the jackals that give the player the most trouble. In that game, they can retreat and they can also dodge your shots. Now imagine, if you will, enemies that are jackals and elites combined, and you don't have an energy shield or regenerative health. This makes every firefight fun and hellishly exciting. They are generally over quickly, but they will put all your first-person shooting skills to the test. Now, F.E.A.R was not the first game to focus on making the enemy a legitimate threat, and it wasn't the first to focus on making the firefights exciting and fast-paced, but it was one of the first to combine the two into an experience that I can only really describe as brutal. In F.E.A.R, you fight a few different types of enemies. You face the ever balaclava sporting clone troopers, power armored Master Chief wannabes, and stealth troopers. Each of these enemies brings their own attributes and each have their own weaknesses that you must exploit, but by far the most fun and difficult enemy type is the common clone trooper. In most first-person shooters, the basic foot soldier is just fodder that you slaughter throughout the game, and then maybe the boss at the end of the level will be tough and require some quick saves. F.E.A.R makes the basic enemies potentially as tough as a boss.
Oh yeah, the game was also somewhat famous for having the Matrix-styled slow-mo mechanic.
That slow-mo mechanic is a lifesaver, as it allows you to have a few extra moments to see how many clones are attacking you, and it gives you those critical seconds to take down a few before they can react and riddle you with lead. This mechanic is one of the elements that ensures that the player won't get too frustrated when facing these rather hard-to-kill foes. F.E.A.R has a limited health regen mechanic. If your health gets low enough, it will regen back up to 25%. But this means you can get shot maybe once, so it's not that much of a handhold. The game still uses health packs, and you had better keep your eye out for them, cause you're gonna need them. And in any given engagement, you may need to use a bunch to stay alive. You can carry 9 of the bloody things at any one time, and in early game, they are quite plentiful, but as you would expect, they become fewer and fewer as time goes on.
Now, let's have a look at the weapons. I guess I should have something a little more high-speed, low-drag, since this is, a more tactical first-person shooter with balaclavas. Now, let's take a look at the weapons. Still not quite tactical enough. I'll just put on my high-speed, low-drag, super tactical stealth hat. To be honest, I don't really like soy.
You can carry 3 weapons of any size or type at any one time. You start the game with the epic tactical pistol of all years, the FN57, and you can John Wickly dual wield them. They work to a point, but give me an MP5 any day. This is one of your go-to weapons. This has the Super Urban Tactical Combat 50-round MP5 mag, and it will allow you to engage numerous enemies without reloading. I find this to be my favorite weapon in the game, as it is legitimately high-speed, low-drag, and it allows you to shoot and scoot easily. You then have the shotgun, the most Gecko 45 of them all, the Spaz 12. Its folding stock is always folded for maximum mobility and minimal accuracy. This weapon is fun to a point, and it can be used to gib enemies. The early 2000s. But, and this is a hairy bum indeed, its range is minimal, and you will find that your foes will have overmatch on range. You then have the most tactical FUD gun of all time. Now in this universe, they take their FUD seriously, and thus the intermediate carbine does not have a worthless plastic pistol grip, and instead, it has a California-compliant thumb-hole stock, and a drum mag, and the ejection port is on the left-hand side? Okay. This rifle, despite being California compliant, is a good rifle to a point. It does have fairly weak damage and blows through ammo a bit too fast, but it does make for a good substitute for the MP5 because it does more damage than your pistol and the ammo is fairly plentiful. You then have the ASP, aka the Steyr AUG. This is the designated marksman's rifle of the game, and by the time it becomes somewhat common, you will have access to more powerful ranged weapons, thus relegating it to the back of the safe. You then have a number of high-quality heavy weapons that will be essential for taking on bosses. The first one you have is the Penetrator. Not just for sexy time anymore, the Penetrator fires massive tungsten rods that will penetrate the soft, quivering flesh of your foes, and pin-cushion bosses with gusto. This should also be inhabiting one of your sweet, sweet slots. The game has its obligatory rocket launcher, and it's a tri-barrel affair, and it works as it should. Way late game, you get a concussion cannon that seems to be kind of weak for all its bluster.
And last, but certainly not least, you get a plasma rifle in the 40-watt range. Yeah, this isn't a plasma rifle. Just what you see here, pal.
This is the best ranged weapon in the game. The plasma rifle in the 40-watt range utterly evaporates your enemies, but it's slow to fire, and thus if you try and charge an enemy squad, you will get cut down in short order, meaning you must deploy it wisely. This will be your go-to ranged weapon in the game, as it's a one-hit kill on all enemy foot soldiers. But be wary, the enemy carries these as well, and can hit you from a sizable distance. The game also features a number of grenade types. Your typical explosive type will be used to take on groups of enemies. Unlike in other first-person shooters, the mine and remote grenade will actually be useful in certain areas in the game, and there will be times where setting traps will be essential to your survival. The game also features a melee system. You can do the old bashy with the rifle butt, and this is good for taking out stragglers and sneaking up on groups of enemies. You also get a super tactical flying kick of the North Star that can be used to get you shot so many times that the enemy won't be able to fit enough of you in a matchbox. It looks cool, but alas, it is a completely useless move that is best relegated to movies with Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal. The game features a good number of secrets to find. You can learn more about the plot by listening to phone messages and by hacking
Alienware laptops,
complete with Intel Core 2 Duos. What's funny is that in the 360 version, they are Dell XPS laptops, and this game actually inspired me to get one. Thankfully, I lacked the dosh at the time to do so, and a couple years later I learned enough about PCs to skip the crap top and embrace the only true top, the desk. You know, that line looked way better when I wrote it down.
No I didn't.
Moving right along from clunky wording, we get the two most important collectibles in the game, health boosters and reflex boosters. You want to find both, and they are often in hard to find locations. The game, like with all of its elements, encourages exploration in an organic fashion. It never tells you to go looking for anything, it just puts it in the game and expects you to do the searching of your own volition. Unless you played the Xbox 360 version. This was one of only 2 games where I actually gave a damn about the achievements. You can get an achievement for finding all of the boosters and an achievement for finding all the XPS laptops. As you would expect, I got both!
And the bullet sponge one! Wait.
One final element of the gameplay that I absolutely love is the fact that it has the ability to toggle the bloody ladder. Not only is it really immersive, but it also keeps you from falling off the bloody thing.
The graphics for F.E.A.R. are quite simply fucking good.
That's right, they're not just good, they're not just damn good, they are fucking good. This game is quite the beaut even in the space year 2020. Just look at that texture work and those shadows. Just look at those exquisite enemy models. Just look at all those talking action figures.
Alright, fine. So long as you ignore the horrible human models, the game looks fucking good.
The game was quite graphically impressive back in 05 and still can hold its own today. The volumetric lighting and light mapping were even better than Doom 3's, and the per pixel lighting really made those levels come alive. The enemies, while looking so tactical that Gecko 45 would tell them to tone it down a bit, allow them to stand the test of time without entering the uncanny valley. The enemy models are highly detailed and they are very well textured, and their animations are so fluid and smooth you would swear this game was from at least 2010. This is an example of a game that had some love put into it. Despite the high quality environments and enemy models, the human models looked like tactical pants covered ass, especially when you compare them to the models in Doom 3. But thankfully, you don't see humans all that much in the course of the game, and they do at least get 2 of the human models just right. The weapon models have also aged tremendously and look like massive blocks of pixels, and they really lack definition. And you also get some rather basic reloading animations. You don't see the point man really reload anything, he just drops it off screen GoldenEye style. This looks really cheap, but doesn't really affect the immersion all that much. All told, while the game has a few rough areas here and there, it's still a fucking good looking game that makes the player immersed in the dark world of F.E.A.R. The music and sound for F.E.A.R. is about as iconic as its gameplay and graphics. The music is atmospheric and really sets a creepy tone for the game, and it keeps the player from getting too cocky as they fight the fell forces of the clones. The sounds of the weapons are also quite good and turn me on. The MP5 sounds like you've got a bloody MP50 cannon in your hand. The shotty also sounds like the hand of Talos when you turn your foes into chunky salsa. The voice acting is pretty impressive all around, and the clones' lines of "flashlight," "shirt," and "he's too fast" will be burned into your brain, and when playing Friday the 13th, I found myself uttering some of the clone lines while playing as Jason. The major characters get some pretty good VA work, but some of the line reads can be a little wooden here and there. Welcome to the world of F.E.A.R., a game wherein action meets Japanese horror, and surprisingly this combination works really well. You, the pointman, aka Balaclava Chief, can fight the hordes of enemies that are vying to destroy you, only you cannot fight the supernatural powers of an unknown entity. All throughout the game, you are subjected to visions of horror. These visions of horror keep the player on edge. This game really knows how to keep the player scared. You can be blasting through countless bastards only to, wham, have not necessarily a freak out, but a vision into a world of blood, of pain, of F.E.A.R. Monolith knew how to keep F.E.A.R.'s pacing consistent. You don't start up with massive action, rather it begins rather sedately. You start up being inducted into the F.E.A.R. organization itself. The F.E.A.R. teams are a subset of the SOCCENT, or Special Operations Central Command. These guys are the best of the best of the best, sir, and they call upon Sofdod troops as their backup. These highly trained Special Operation Forces go out and take down any supernatural threats to the United States. You are charged with hunting down Paxton Fettel. He is a psychic commander that has broken out of containment and has gone rogue with a battalion of clone troopers. It is your task to be a bad enough balaclava to take him down. It would seem, though, that F.E.A.R is running low on money due to, I guess, some sort of budget crunch, because you were dropped off at your first mission in your mission controls car.
To the Chevy Cruise! Point man, you got some cash on you, bro? I didn't get paid this week, and there's only $5 in the tank.
The first mission is a decent tutorial that is suitably spooky and ends with the point man getting smacked in the face. This happens a lot in the game. Fettel then tells you some cryptic crap and then runs off. As you would expect, this also happens a lot in the game. Now right here is where the real game begins, and thankfully you don't have to take your boss's jalopy to get there, and instead you get dropped off Blackhawk style. The first few levels here have some great creepiness to them and some even more epic action. Monolith did a job almost as good as Raven Software when it came to crafting these levels. And like in a good Raven Software game, you can get lost. And getting lost in F.E.A.R is not quite as boring as it would be in another game. And that's because the creepiness pervades the majority of F.E.A.R. Never does the game get dull. It always puts you on edge. And the safest you will ever feel in F.E.A.R is when you're in the midst of combat. In addition to the combatives, you do have a few minor puzzles here and there that are fairly easy to solve, but one of the great aspects of these puzzles is the fact that the game does not telegraph what you have to do. You have to figure out all these things on your own without giant glowing arrows, thus making solving a puzzle that much more satisfying. The puzzles themselves are like Raven Software puzzles. Once you figure out what you're supposed to do, you find out just how easy they bloody well were. The same is true when it comes to navigating the levels themselves. There are some levels where it's, shall we say, a bit difficult to figure out how to progress, but once you've taken the time to examine the level, you'll find out just how easy it was to carry on. After getting blown through a window for the first time, Point Man continues his search for Paxton Fettel, and little by little you learn that Fettel is going after a certain group of people, and it is also implied that, Warhammer 40k Space Marine style, that Fettel can gain people's memories by eating their brains. As you would expect, Fettel eludes the Point Man, and the level ends with Point Man and Sergeant Johnson Jr. learning that Armacam headquarters is under attack. The bulk of the game will take place at Armacam headquarters, and the levels here are nothing short of amazing. The corridors are not just straight hallways, and the various offices never become dull or repetitive as you fight through the labyrinthine headquarters building. And there's even a few in-jokes here and there, most notably the TPS reports. Office Space. Thankfully, I don't have to work Saturday. For the vast majority of F.E.A.R, you will be a one-man balaclava killing machine. But thankfully, you do get a fairly decent supporting cast. You have Jen. She is a psychic that works as a side investigator that tries to put things in perspective. You then have Sergeant Johnson Jr. that, as the comedy name implies, is the exact same character as Sergeant Johnson from Halo, and hell, he even sounds like him too. He tries to provide the Point Man with reinforcements that have varying results. You then have the Cortana for the game, a one Randy Betters.
I absolutely love the name Randy Betters because it sounds like the name a real person would have. Not everyone is going to have a cool name like Browning or Mauser or Garand. Some people are stuck with rather unfortunate names like Furlong.
Old Randy will talk with the Point Man on occasion and will read to you the information found on the various Alienware laptops. None of the characters really do all that much, as the main villain for the game is pretty much too high of a power level for anyone in this game to actually handle on their own. But the characters do one major thing that makes them endearing. They are all really, really nice. Not one person is rude, mean, or insulting to the Point Man, and they always make Point Man feel like a member of the team. Randy Betters is always, shock, supportive of the Point Man, and will call him things like buddy now and again, and will show concern when something bad happens to them. All of this makes the player actually care about his teammates, and further immerses the player into the game. As you fight through the Armacam headquarters, you find a number of people were working on some project called Origin, and that said project might also be polluting the local water supply. You eventually find the fatter, uglier brother of Dennis Nedry from Jurassic Park, named Norton Mapes. He even sounds like an asshole. The fat, bastard even gets his own theme song when he shows up. He serves as a sort of nemesis to the Point Man, and is always trying to fuck up Point Man's plans. In addition to getting his own theme, every time Norton Antivirus shows up, numerous bags of Cheetos will be found littering the level. Eventually, you actually get a chance to rescue one of Fettel's targets, but as you get him to the chopper, you get attacked by Paul Blart's more skinny violent brothers. The ATC, ladies and gentlemen, are a bunch of rent-a-cops that try to attack both the US military and the clone troopers, and well, this works about as well as you expect, and they all get 9mm enemas. The models for these guys are reasonably detailed, but in addition to not being as competent as the clones, they also look like ass as well. They appear infrequently and are easy enough to eradicate. As you search the phone messages, you will learn that someone named Harlan Wade was trying to talk some sense into the Armacam execs. Armacam got the bright idea to open up some containment cell, and some bad medicine escaped, and now they are trying to put that medicine back in. Eventually you learn that Alice Wade, Harlan Wade's daughter, is still in the building and that you must save her. By this point of the game, the Armacam headquarters building kind of becomes like the mansion from Resident Evil. You have explored numerous areas of it, and you have pretty much on your own pieced together the plot. This is excellent game design because your sense of familiarity with this location will ensure that it stays in your memory for decades to come. You rescue Alice Wade for about 36 seconds before you get separated. What's really cool here is that Alice Wade is not a bitch, nor is she annoying, and in a fairly short time, the player wants to actually protect her, thus giving the player emotional impetus to try and save her. Alice Wade is told that her father is in danger, and she shows legitimate concern, thus making the player like her more since she is obviously a caring person, and thus when she speeds off in her car to save her father, we actually care what happens to her. It is at this point that we leave the Armacam Corporation building and head to the end game. You fight through some derelict buildings, and we see another excellent aspect of the game. Believe it or not, I had forgotten this part. In any other game, that would have been a QTE. And without one, F.E.A.R pulls it off perfectly and never breaks the player's immersion. This part of the game also has the building of pain. I remember this part from back in the day. With my Super 2020 gaming skills and foreknowledge, I was able to stomp this area. But back when I first played the game, it took me an hour to make it out of here. When you make it here, you better pray to the Omnissiah himself that you have a plasma rifle. Otherwise, prepare to get carbonized. You finally fight your way to the Origin facility, and this level is once again pretty bloody fun. And you learn that the creepy little girl that shows up throughout the entire game was someone named Alma. She has been in containment since she gave birth to twins. And then you see in a well-choreographed scene, Harlan Wade shoot Mapes in the gut and head into Alma's containment cell. I like this scene because you never lose immersion. The game never stops and kicks in the Hans Zimmer. You just look out a window and see Wade blow Mapes away. Once you enter the containment cell proper, you have a freak out and find Paxton Fettel standing over the body of Alice Wade. You then blow him away and move on. And thank Yzmir this wasn't a cutscene. By making you care about Alice Wade, the player wants to avenge her death. After this, you catch up with Harlan Wade himself, and you bear witness to his last act. He attempts to atone for his past misdeeds by opening the containment cell holding Alma. And, as it would turn out, she's already dead.
Yeah, but does she know it yet?
She evaporates Harlan and then pulls Point Man into another freakout. During some freakouts, you will be attacked by random ghost creatures. These guys hurt, so keep a wary eye out for them. You also have to fight Alma. If she touches you, you die. I kept waiting for a cutscene to trigger, so I just let her give Point Man a big old Cthulhu hug.
The old Pointy did not appreciate it at all. That's some metric shit ton levels of bad touch.
After driving Alma Wade off with mind bullets, you learn that Alma was really Harlan Wade's daughter, and that you, the Point Man, and Paxton Fettel are Alma's children. After this revelation, you blow the facility and get picked up by Sergeant Johnson Jr., and just before the credits, it turns out that Alma lived. Fade to black.
A hell of an ending for a hell of a game. Now, let's take a look at the villains for the game and the franchise as a whole.
The villains for F.E.A.R. are some of the best in first-person shooting, and that's because while they are monstrous, they are not monstrous of their own design. Fettel is pitiable and sympathetic because he was driven unto madness by Alma and is thus not 100% in control of his actions. Alma is one of the most, if not the most, tragic villains in gaming itself. She was tortured from a young age by her very own father and then forced to give birth. She was then killed and locked, still conscious, into a containment cell. Her sanity has gone bye-bye a long time ago, and she is now just a tiny ball of suffering and rage. The man who put her through this, while a bad guy, is not just a generic mustache twirler. He actually has some remorse over what he has done, thus making this game one of the better written first-person shooters in the entire genre. There is no truly bad guy in the game. Instead, you are fighting against a force that is much more morally gray than we would normally see in a first-person shooter. So what about the other F.E.A.Rs? F.E.A.R 1 would get 2 pretty good expansions that were rendered non-canon by F.E.A.R 2, but they are still worth a look. F.E.A.R 2 changed everything in the franchise for the worse. The story was much more basic, the gameplay simplified, and the graphics, I gotta say, look kinda crap in comparison to F.E.A.R 1's. The game is still playable and is a decent popcorn experience. A number of years ago, I reviewed F.E.A.R 3, or F.E.A.R as it was called upon release, and that game was, to say the least, massively divisive. It is a bad game in theory, but in practice, while it is worse in every way than F.E.A.R 1, it's still fun, and co-op provided a rather unique experience. No F.E.A.R sequel ever matched the sheer quality of F.E.A.R 1, but no F.E.A.R sequel was ever 100% heretical, and the series never became horrible or even really bad, and that is an accomplishment to say the very least.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's doff our beanies, or never put them on in the first place, and give heed to one of the great Alpha Prime games of all time. If you have never played First Encounter Assault Recon, I highly recommend picking it up on the next Steam sale for $1, and you will find yourself having a game wherein you can play it for the next decade. And so, I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Medal of Honor, Frontline, and good Alien Isolation, whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this great content.